Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Schroeder, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about the impacts of shrub encroachment on soil seed bank community dynamics in the Northern Chihuahuan Desert here in southern New Mexico. And so would first like to thank the other co-authors on this particular project, Molly Reichenborn, who you will hear from later, Erik Lehnhoff, and Akasha Faist, as well as the various organizations and institutions that made the funding and this research possible, including the University of Montana and the Institute on Ecosystems, New Mexico State University, the New Mexico Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Jornada Basin LTER site. So, as we probably know, rangelands face numerous threats around the globe. These threats include things like changes in land use, changing land use intensity, invasive species, climate change, and the associated feedbacks of climate change. These threats have resulted in global changes of ecosystems in general terms, going from, in a lot of rangeland environments, going from grassland and perennial grass dominated systems pushed over alternate state thresholds into alternate shrubland communities where the dominant vegetation is woody plants and shrubs, where there's often a loss in ecosystem services and oftentimes a drop in the perceived value of these particular ecosystems by society at large. So let's give one particular example of these ecosystem changes down in southern New Mexico, down around the Jornada Basin LTER site, north of Las Cruces, New Mexico, where historically the Chihuahuan Desert was once dominated by a picture that looked a lot like this, where in front of you is a large stand of black grama or Bouteloua areopoda, which is a perennial stoloniferous grass with high forage value. However, due to a myriad of factors, primarily an interaction between extreme drought and intense grazing during said extreme drought, shrub encroachment occurred, pushing these systems where shrubs encroached into these grassland systems, pushing them towards this threshold. And the particular shrub of interest is pictured here, honey mesquite or Prosopis glandulosa, which is a thorny, woody shrub in the Fabaceae family, so it's a nitrogen fixer. And that positive shrub encroachment increased in a lot of these systems and became a positive feedback loop of this degradation. You get some scenarios and some ecosystems that look a lot like this, where it's really mesquite and bare ground. And so these systems have shifted into that alternate shrubland state, and many tens of thousands of hectares around the Jornada Basin have converted from grasslands to something that looks like this, where as that positive feedback loop occurs, and the shrubs are really the only thing that can really survive in these really harsh environments, wind erosion is a really important factor, and thus the shrubs altering the course of the wind and eddy turbulence accumulate sediment, accumulate litter, and accumulate soil nutrients, creating these islands of fertility. So all this to say that with a lot of other data that numerous other people well before me have collected, we know a lot about the above ground vegetation dynamics and how states shift within these systems. But something we don't know a lot about is about the relationship of the above ground vegetation dynamics with the soil seed bank. It's what I mean when I say the soil seed bank. Here we define it as the living seeds in the soil profile and on the soil surface. And so I'll be focusing on the upper 5 centimeters of soil, those soil seeds that are readily available to germinate and establish into the plant community. And the soil seed bank is the seed-based or the sexually produced propagule-based portion of a plant community's regenerative potential, with the other portion being the bud bank, or those asexually produced vegetative propagules, like as you see here in the lower right of black grama buds and stolons. And so we know that the soil seed bank is really important for community dynamics and the influences the ability of a site to respond to stochastic disturbances and management. And in the context of ecological restoration, the more we dig into the soil seed bank, the more we realize and the more we have found out that can be incredibly important as either a help to ecological restoration or could pose a particular barrier to ecological restoration. And so something that needs to be considered. So Up until, like I said, up until recently, the soil seed bank had not been incorporated or attempted to be incorporated into alternate state theory and associated with above ground vegetation dynamics. However, this paper in Bioscience by Ma et al. Came out in 2021 that did just that, a first crack to develop a conceptual model to take a stab at how to incorporate these two components. So first, they presented this particular conceptual model where, as you go from left to right in these upper diagrams, you have the above ground vegetation as you go from your grassland state, and you increase shrub encroachment as you go further right. That's represented by your herbaceous components in your blue stars there. And as you increase shrub encroachment, you increase your white stars. You increase the relative proportion, and then the total portion of the vegetation is going to become primarily shrubs at that far right in that shrubland state. When it comes to the soil seed bank, Ma posited that there would be a similar change as you go from along that gradient, where you start out being dominated by herbaceous species in the soil seed bank. But once you get to that threshold point, that point in the middle, where there are still some herbaceous species in the soil seed bank, but you get crowded by shrub seeds. Once you collapse into that alternate shrubland state, they expect a overall depletion of the soil seed bank at large. And so similarly, they also posit that there is going to be this change in the relative contribution between the two pools, between the above ground vegetation and the soil seed bank, and vice versa, an overall depletion of these contributions across this gradient. They also posit that there is this idea of rebuilding capital, a core species assemblage that is consistent within this grassland to threshold state. But once you collapse into that alternate stable state of shrublands, that core species assemblage of rebuilding capital is lost. And so they then say that for management context, if you're going to be relying on the soil seed bank to get yourself back to that grassland state, that best times for management is here at the threshold of state transition or well before that. So simplified, or to another way that they posited this is that soil seed banks may be an indicator as an early warning system of state transition. So as you go from left to right here on that x-axis, again, you're going from a grassland to a shrubland state. And on the y-axis, they posit that the similarity of the species assemblage between the soil seed bank and the above ground vegetation may serve as that early warning system. Whereas we know in grassland system here in the left, that there's a highly dissimilar community between the above ground vegetation and the soil seed bank. As you increase shrub encroachment, they posit that that similarity between those two pools is going to increase. And then once the system collapses into the shrubland state, it will concomitantly, the similarity will then concomitantly drop again. So all these things that Ma posited is theory, is concepts, no data behind it. Let's go test it. And so the goal for this particular talk and this project has been to test Ma's 2021, this conceptual framework that they posited in that paper in 2021, in looking at the soil seed bank composition in relation to shrub encroachment, and also incorporate shrub interspace microsites into their framework, because that's something that's particularly important in our mesquite shrubland communities. So this experiment happens down on the Jornada Experimental Range, Jornada Basin LTAR, down in southern New Mexico, which is in the Northern Chihuahuan Desert, where we have 20 plots, each of them 5 hectares, distributed on sandy and shallow sandy ecological sites along a shrub encroachment gradient. And in 2020, when we established and first collected baseline data for these plots, it was a non-monsoon. We had very poor growing season precipitation. And then in 2021, we had a really good monsoon year. So for context, that's important. So this is what this shrub encroachment gradient looks like on our system, where we go from left to right, from a grassland state to a shrubland state, with that threshold point or that shrub encroached grassland in the middle. And we collected in 2020 and 2021, that I'll be talking to you all about today, above ground vegetation and soil seed bank samples, where we collected above ground vegetation data on 3 50-meter line point intercept transects per plot that Molly Reichenborn is going to be talking to you all a lot in more detail here in a minute. And we collected soil seed banks. We established and collected soil seed bank samples based on those LPI transects, where we established In each plot, 6 pairs of shrub island interspace samples, so 12 soil seed bank sampling locations per plot that we repeat sampled each year, for a total of 240 soil seed bank samples per year for this study. This is an example of what that shrub interspace pairing looks like. So mesquite shrub island that we collected soil seed bank samples from underneath on the left, and associated interspace there on the right, where we then took all those soil seed bank samples back and conducted greenhouse emergence trials to quantify the soil seed bank species assemblages and their density across this gradient. So now let's get into the results of this particular study. First, looking at the spatiotemporal dynamics. What do we expect to see in terms of the seed bank density and distribution across the shrub encroachment gradient between years? We see that, so here I'm presenting the total seed density, so all species seeds summed together. So that's on the y-axis, the seed density and seed number, seeds per square meter on the y-axis. On the x-axis is our shrub encroachment level from left to right, grassland to shrubland, low to high. And then in the bars is our microsites, orange being the interspace and green being the shrub microsites. And then the two panels, 2020 on the left and 2021 on the right. Two very different precipitation years. But what we found in the modeling is that year didn't matter in the model. It was primarily an interaction between the shrub encroachment level and the microsite, but most strongly being the shrub encroachment level, with high shrub encroachment being we're seeing a concentration, a redistribution and concentration of the seeds underneath of the shrub canopies in both years in the high encroachment sites. Next, thinking about back to Ma's, how they posited that the soil seed bank above ground community vegetation similarity as an early warning system. We calculated community similarity between the above ground vegetation and the soil seed bank for each year. And so what we have here, again, x-axis low to high shrub encroachment. Community similarity goes from low similarity on the lower portion of the y-axis to high community similarity on the upper portion of the y-axis. And overlaid here, I have the same curve that Ma posited in that paper overlaid over top of our data. And so what we see here for 2020 on the left is that the pattern sets up, the pattern that we see in our data meets very nicely with what Ma posited would exist. Whereas in 2021, that really good monsoon year, that pattern disappeared. But I think, so interesting to know that that pattern was different between years in this particular case. And I have some ideas that I can talk during the question session if people have questions on why I think that that pattern changed. So overall takeaways with the study, looking at what are the soil seed bank dynamics between years along shrub encroachment gradient down here in the Jornada Basin and our sandy and shallow sandy ecological sites. Instead of a depletion of the overall soil seed bank as shrub encroachment increased, we saw a redistribution and concentration of seed resources under shrub canopies as encroachment increased, and that pattern was similar between years. And when it comes to the above, and also we found that the above ground vegetation characteristics are related to the soil seed bank community and could possibly be used as this idea of an early warning system, but that pattern differs between years across that gradient. And so what does that have then in the context for shrub management? Stick around and you'll find out from Molly Reichenborn in just a minute. So big thanks to all the people associated with this project that made everything happen. And thank you all for listening. I'll be happy to take your questions. Thanks.